Welcome to the Beginner Photography Podcast. Today, we're going to learn how to license our photos. So let's get into it.
Welcome to the Beginner Photography Podcast, a weekly podcast for those who believe that moments matter most and that a beautiful photo is more than just a sum of its settings. A show for those who want to do more with the gear they have to take better photos today. And now, your host, Raymond Hatfield.
Welcome back to this episode of the Beginner Photography Podcast. As always, I am your host and photo friend, Raymond Hatfield. And we got a doozy for us today. Today we are learning about something that I know not only confuses me, but many other new photographers as well. So today we are going to dive into licensing our images with a photographer who has been doing it for years and years and years and years. Just a wealth of knowledge, and I know that you're going to pick up a lot from this episode. But first, I want to give a listener shout out to Meg for leaving the show a 5-star iTunes review. Meg says, I listen to the Beginner Photography Podcast literally every day. I'm just starting out, so this podcast really spoke to me. I feel so distant sometimes chasing a day and daydreaming about becoming a photographer. So it is a reassurance that with my drive and determination, I can accomplish this dream. I have truly been inspired by you and your interviews with passionate photographers like myself. Meg, oh my gosh, I am rooting for you. This is so awesome. Thank you for sharing your story and how the podcast is helping you. It is my goal, obviously. I truly believe that everybody can take great photos, and I want to share that with you. I want to hopefully instill that upon you through the interviews that we have with other photographers who have made it. You've heard plenty of photographers talk about starting at a day job and then just continuing to work at it and learning their craft and mastering it until they were able to take their photography skills full time. And that is my only wish for you as well, if that's what you're looking for. So if you're listening and, the podcast has given you any sort of value, I would be so appreciative of you if you could leave the podcast a review on iTunes as well. It's easy. It's free to do. If you're within the podcast app on your phone right now, on an iPhone, you can just swipe up on the podcast episode. And if you scroll all the way to the bottom, there will be a spot to leave a iTunes review. So again, very appreciative. And Meg, again, I'm rooting for you. So today we are chatting with Adam Taylor. Adam Taylor is a photographer who got his start, interestingly enough, in a completely different genre, in BMX photography. And as you're going to be able to hear, transitioned into, different styles of photography to then be able to license his images, which he's here to talk about today. So even if you are, a family photographer, even if you are just shooting kind of your own personal work, I really think that you're going to get a lot out of this episode because, not everybody wants to go into business for themselves, and I understand that. But Adam really breaks down some quick and easy ways that the photos that you may already be taking, or how to tweak certain photos that you're already taking, to be able to, potentially license your photos. And who wouldn't want a few extra $100 or $1,000 a year with the photos that you're already taking? So, again, I really think that you're going to get a lot out of this one. So we're just going to hop into this. Oh, you know what? Actually, I forgot to mention, premium members are going to get a ton out of this episode today. As you can imagine, when it comes to licensing your images, that is probably more of a professional skill, or a skill for professionals, those who are looking to make money. So this week, premium members who always get extra information each week in the extended interview on how to make money with your camera, you are going to hear how to find the decision makers who are actually going to be the ones purchasing photos to license, how to set up and write an email template that is, what's the word I'm looking for? Not guaranteed, not generated, geared towards getting a quick yes, how to price your images to license, that's a big one, and then of course, how to protect your images legally against any sort of theft. So a ton on offer here for premium members. And if you want to hear the answers to all of those questions, then you can become a premium member today and also get access to the entire back catalog of previous photographers as well, sharing their best business information by heading over to beginnerphotographypodcast.com and clicking the premium membership button at the top of the page to join today. Plans start for as low as just $10 a month. You can become a premium member, get all of that information. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get on into this interview with Adam Taylor right now. Trying to learn more about you, one of the big things about you is that before getting into real estate and then later licensing your photo, you started off doing BMX photography, which is always exciting to think about, high energy, lots of adrenaline going on. But I couldn't find anything out about what happened before that. So how did you get into photography in the first place? And when did you know that, photography and having a camera in your hand was going to play an important role in your life?
I just got goosebumps even you asking that question. I fell in love with photography in 5th grade. My mom took my sister and me to New York City from a small town, Louisiana. We went on a family vacation, and she just let me run wild with her little point and shoot Kodak camera and probably 15 rolls of film back then.
Oh, wow.
It was a very distinct moment. I was on the pedestal of the Statue of Liberty, like looking up at the statue and snapping pictures, and looking out at across the harbor at the skyline and snapping pictures. And like right then I was like, this is what I want to do. I came home from that trip just telling everybody I want to be a photographer when I grow up. Fast forward, my senior year of high school, I was on the yearbook staff. So I would walk around the school to take pictures. I would go get them developed. I would come back and kind of design and lay out pages with those pictures. And I was super into BMX bike riding at the time, had been my whole life. And I basically said, if I could do this, meaning what I was doing for the yearbook staff, take pictures, lay out pages for a BMX magazine, that would be the coolest job in the world.
Of course.
So, upon graduation, everybody's saying, what are you going to do when you graduate? What are you going to do when you graduate? And I had like an answer in the can for everybody. I literally told every person, I'm going to go to school for graphic design as a backup plan. And then when I graduate, I'm going to move to Southern California and do whatever it takes to work at Ride BMX magazine. So I went to school for graphic design. While I was in school, I realized that the designers and the photographers for an actual magazine in the real world are two different jobs, unlike the yearbook where the designer and the photographer was the same person, me, the 17-year-old. So once I realized that in college, which is so funny to think back of how naive I was, then I started to focus more on photography. And a month before I graduated, I got a call from the editor of that magazine asking if I wanted to fly out for an interview. And got my dream job working for the magazine right out of college. So about 6 months after I graduated, I moved from small town Louisiana out to big time metropolitan Southern California and started working at my dream job, photographing for the magazine.
What a huge change in lifestyle that is for a young 17-year-old. I want to go back to 5th grade though, when you were there at the Statue of Liberty and you're taking photos and you're looking up and you realize this is what I want to do, without having seemingly even seen any of those photos at that point. Why do you think it was that moment, or what was it in that moment that really struck a chord with you?
That's a good question. I loved being able to take what I was seeing in my head, frame it up the way I wanted to frame it, and then the excitement of I'm going to get to develop this and then share it with people. Mm-hmm. Sharing my work with people has always been super exciting for me. Even today, when I get done with a photo shoot and I'm finished editing the set, I bring my wife into the office and go through the photos and kind of have like a show and tell, and, tell her and show her all the photos that I shot. It was that idea of I'm going to get to share this with people. And then, I got home and I developed them and I had all these stacks of photos and, I would cut them with scissors to crop them, right? Because they were, printouts from Walmart or wherever it was, So I was like chopping them up with scissors and it was just the coolest thing.
So it was a very much a creative process for you in terms of being able to visualize something, use the tools that you had to capture it, and then, even continue on by cutting it up and doing more things with it.
Absolutely. And to elaborate on that a little bit more, the type of camera it was, I don't know if you or your listeners recall this, but there was an APS, like advanced photo system camera from Kodak back in the day that had like a little switch where it had 3 different settings for the different lengths of the photo. So essentially it would give you like a panoramic photo or like a normal size or kind of a crop size.
Oh,
And it was just,
really?
it was just how much, how wide like the shutters were going to open on that piece of film. Um, and yeah, you had to, it was like a different type of film. Like it slid in, you didn't have to like pull the little reel out,
Uh-huh.
it just popped right out. And I think you could get it developed at all the same places. Um, but yeah, so like even that part of the creative process back then was really cool. Of like, I get to decide which setting I have it on, for this skyline picture or whatever.
Y- I'm definitely gonna have to look that up. That sounds really fun and interesting. I remember you saying that right there reminded me of I must have been I mean, it must have been fourth or fifth grade. I wasn't very old. My stepdad had rebuilt it was a 1969 Chevelle, and like I remember him building it up from like this just piece of rust to a finished car. And none of that has anything to do with the story. But he had a friend who was also into cars, and at the time, that friend of his had some sort of camera. I didn't know what it was at the time because I was in fourth or fifth grade. And I remember that he was taking photos at a car show. And then when he brought them to us so that we could see them, they were all panorama images.
Hmm.
And I remember thinking to myself, this is insane. I've never seen anything like this. I was so young. But now thinking back to some of those photos, like he was still taking photos in the traditional sense where like whatever subject was still directly in the center. So there was
Mhm.
like 2/3 of the image just totally empty, and it was a
Yeah.
waste of panoramic. But I'm gonna have to look that up. That sounds like a lot of fun. That's very
Yeah.
cool. That's very cool. So obviously the visualization, the framing, those things were important to you. But when it became time for you to maybe advance and get your first SLR or
Mhm.
DSLR, did you find any big learning hiccups along the way when it came time to properly learning exposure or anything like that?
Um, Yeah, I remember a lot of things. Let's see, where do I even begin? So I'm just going to talk this out loud because this is an interesting question I haven't had before. So the first DSLR, or I'm sorry, the first SLR, I was a junior in high school, and my mom got an SLR with like a zoom lens, like a kit lens, so that she could take a picture of my sister crossing the graduation stage. She wanted to be able to zoom in for graduation. So that's when I kind of adopted this new SLR. Um, and then I kind of carried that with me throughout college. And so I used that camera in college. And um, one of my first big hiccups, funny story, I lived with a band. Any emo screamo fans out there might know a band called As Cities Burn. I lived with that band as they were forming themselves, and I was taking their first quote unquote press photos, and I didn't know what I was doing. I knew that I was always good with composition. Like I just had it in me. I went to school for graphic design. Like there was something in me that was like good with like arranging compositions and stuff, right? But as far as the camera settings, I had no idea what I was doing. And they said they wanted to take photos in this like elevator, like this weird like cargo elevator where one of the guys worked. And so I brought a flash. I don't even know where I got this flash, but I brought this flash and I started taking pictures. And I mean, I didn't know what I was doing. It was just an on-camera flash, right? Uh, and I got the pictures back, and there was like this black line across like the lower third of the photos. I
Yeah.
was like, "What is this? Like, I don't know what is going on. Like, dude, I'm sorry, I messed up your press photos. Like, I don't know what this is." And it's funny because I was in college, and I remember showing them to this other kid who was like in high school, but his dad happened to be a photographer, and he
He
explained
knew right
how
away.
the shutter sync worked, and if you shoot a photo with too high a shutter speed with a flash, it doesn't stay open long enough, yada yada. And so that was like a big learning thing. That it's funny. I was literally just thinking about that incident like last night in the shower for some reason about how far I've come. And flash photography is really big in the BMX world. Like you have to use flashes to stop the motion and all that kind of stuff. So that was a big learning lesson for sure. Around the same time, fisheye lenses are really big in action sports. Getting real close to the action stuff. And at the time, I just had a kit lens, and I went to this like weird kind of like downtown camera shop where they sell a bunch of kits, and it's this weird hawker that's kind of hustling and selling you things. You'll see a whole row of these stores in downtown New Orleans or somewhere in the New York district or whatever, right? Hopefully people can imagine the kind of stores I'm talking about. But I went in there and I was like, oh, I need a wide angle lens. And he sells me this, weird contraption that screws onto the front of my lens.
Oh.
As a wide angle, because I didn't know what it was. And I remember showing it to like an actual BMX photographer that I met at one point. And he's like, I don't know what that is, but that looks sketchy. I don't think you should be using that. But he didn't explain like, hey, an actual fisheye lens is 15 millimeters. It's a different lens, like he didn't explain that. So I was just like, oh, okay. Like, no wonder my pictures aren't very crisp and sharp, and And at this time I had switched to DSLR. But yeah, there was a lot of learning curve there for sure, man.
Oh, geez. So how do you, when it comes to these moments of like, what am I doing wrong, and ruining a band's press photos and stuff, how do you continue to just move forward? Because when you're new to something like this, a mistake or an accident like that can feel pretty devastating. How do you just keep moving on?
Yeah, for me, it was just keep your eye on the prize type of mentality. Like, like I said, when I was 17, like I knew what I wanted in life, and nothing was going to stop me from getting that. And so, for all those years, the only thing I was focused on was, creating this career in the BMX industry that I dreamed of. While my friends were out riding and building ramps and stuff, sure, I joined them sometimes, but there was a lot of times that I was in my room, like, building a BMX website or working on some BMX design stuff or whatever, because everything I wanted to do was just like, how can I move the needle closer to my goal?
Mm.
And so, when those kind of incidents happened, it was just, okay, how can I learn from this? Who can I ask to teach me? Like, where can I learn? Obviously now, YouTube is so prevalent, and you could Google just about anything. But yeah, I found a lot of great resources in just asking people. And thankfully, there was one of the guys that worked at that magazine that I wanted to work for, who was very receptive to emails. And, I would reach out to him and ask questions, and he would give me, little pointers and tips and stuff. So just, asking the people that I admired really helped out a lot.
That is fantastic. I feel like that story doesn't happen as often as it should. And I love how, as you said, you keep your eye on the prize. You look to the long term. What is it that you want? And now you're going to keep working towards that. But today you're no longer doing that. So tell me where that transition came from BMX to, you just went right into real estate. Is that right?
There was a little bit of a transition in between there. So from BMX, honestly, it was the fact that I worked in the industry for about 8.5 years or so. And my passion was just changing and shifting. I was getting older. And honestly, I found CrossFit. I drank the pill, I drank the Kool-Aid, as they say, and I fell in love with CrossFit. And it's funny because I started doing CrossFit because some BMX professionals were doing it to get better on their bike, and they were improving their health and their fitness. And so I was like, oh, if I do CrossFit, I'll be able to ride longer and not get hurt when I crash. And then within about 3 months of going to CrossFit just about every day, I loved it so much that my mindset completely flipped, where my thought was, oh, if I go ride today in a crash, I might be too hurt to go to CrossFit. And I just fell in love with it, and kind of how I fell in love with BMX and turned it into career. I started to do the same thing with CrossFit. So I kind of shifted from like shooting X Games to shooting the CrossFit Games, and I started getting clients in the fitness space. And eventually I decided that it was too much of a hustle and a grind. It was a little too competitive. It was a little too young, not quite lucrative enough of an industry, where I didn't want to repeat the same thing I did in BMX, where my salary wasn't very much. I really had to hustle to make any kind of money in BMX. And eventually my passion left because I was burnt out on it, and I got too jaded by the industry and the personalities within the industry. And I didn't want to turn another hobby into a career and then lose another hobby, essentially. And so at that point, then it was like, okay, well, what do I do now? Like, what can I take pictures of that's going to pay me? And so that's when I made that switch to real estate. Because at the time also the BMX and the CrossFit stuff was having me travel quite a bit. So, I was traveling anywhere from like 120 to 200 days out of the year for like 7 years straight. And I wanted to settle down. I wanted to get a dog. I wanted to be able to have a relationship. So I was like, okay, what would interest me enough to take pictures of that doesn't require me to leave and travel? And I really liked expensive houses, like, luxury houses. And, being a dreamer and a goal setter, I wanted to go hang out in these like multi-million-dollar houses in LA to be able to picture myself in them, to be able to dream a little bit, and to be able to kind of feed my motivation and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea of shooting portraits and weddings and stuff just never interested me. So I was like, all right, let's give this real estate thing a try. So I went that direction, but it didn't last too long with the real estate thing because the business model, I just wasn't fully aware of the business model before I got into it. And I thought that I was going to be able to create art. Like I explained earlier, I like that creative process, I like creating art. But what I found out relatively quickly with real estate is that you're not necessarily creating art. It's a different business model. You're shooting a lot more and charging a lot less and trying to do volume.
Mm-hmm.
And, you're not getting paid a wage that will allow you to spend the time in a home to, slow down and take your time. It kind of has to be a fast-paced workflow. And yeah, I just wasn't enjoying it that much. But through that, I realized that I could take pictures for other people of the same type of spaces and get paid more and work slower and enjoy the process more. So that's kind of where the transition to working with architects, interior designers, and custom home builders came, which is what I'm doing now still.
Oh, I see. Okay. That's a big difference between working with real estate and working with the people who are essentially creating these homes, designing these homes. Oh,
Yeah.
okay. So then today you are in your teaching as well as how to license your images, which is something that I'm super excited to talk about. When you reached out to me and were like, hey, would you like to talk about licensing your images? And I thought to myself, I don't even know where I'd begin. As a wedding photographer myself, I don't have to worry about any of these things, and it is a question that I see that kind of continues to come up in the Beginner Photography Podcast community, the Facebook group and whatnot. So before we dive into the licensing side of things, can you tell me, as if I was 5 years old, as if a 5-year-old came up to you and said, what is licensing photos? Like, how does that work? What would you say to them?
Yeah, good question. So starting at the beginning here, when you as a photographer sell your photos, you're actually just selling a license to use the photos. And so hopefully this 5-year-old uses Photoshop, because I'm going to use this as an example.
5-year-olds are pretty advanced these days, so yeah. I think we'll be okay.
When you, 5-year-old, when you purchase Frozen 2 on your Apple TV, you don't own that movie. You cannot give that movie to all your friends that also want to watch Frozen 2. So that's the 3-year-old version, because my daughter loves Frozen 2. But as photographers, we all use the Adobe Creative Suite and different software, Microsoft Word and Excel, those kind of things. When you buy these software programs, you're not buying them, right? You're licensing them. And every year you pay for a new license, and your license is for you to use in your home and your business. And if you had a business with a bunch of employees and they were all going to use it, you would pay a different licensing rate. You would pay more to use that same software. But again, you still can't give it to everybody, right? So when you sell your photos, you're selling a license to use the photos for a specific reason. For me, an interior designer hires me, and she pays or he pays to use the photos to market their own business. And the license that I sell to them doesn't allow them to distribute the photos or give them to other people. So if I shoot a kitchen for an interior designer and she wants to use that for her website or a magazine ad, that's great. But if that same picture of a kitchen wants to be used by the company that manufactured the faucet, or that made the cabinets, or that manufactured the tiles on the backsplash, all those companies, if they want to use them, they would also have to pay for a license to use those photos.
From you? From
me, that's correct, yeah. So I am the copyright holder. As the creator of the image, by US law, I hold the copyright. Obviously there's caveats, and let me put a big disclaimer here. I'm not a lawyer, don't take legal advice from me. But in the US, you own the copyright when you shoot the photo. If you have a contract with a client that says you're going to do a copyright transfer or something like that, that's a little bit different. But most photographers don't work like that.
Right.
So yeah, if the cabinet manufacturer, if the tile company wants to use those photos, they would have to come to me and negotiate a licensing rate from me to use those images.
That was a very clear example that made a lot of sense. And it's funny, I guess, without even realizing it, I've kind of been giving that example to my couples. Like when they ask, do we have print rights? Can we, do these things with our photos? I've always used the example of, which is very similar to your Frozen example, but it's of a book. You can go to a store and you can buy a book, but you don't know the words in that book. You don't own that book. You're paying to read that book, to look at that book, I guess. So that totally makes sense. Why do you think that this is so confusing to so many new photographers?
Yeah, good question. I think just lack of education, which is part of what I'm trying to do is teach photographers, teach companies, teach our clients, and educate on what this is. And the idea that you quote unquote buy something or pay for something and you can't do whatever you want with it is kind of a foreign idea. The software companies do a pretty good job of monitoring their software, because the way that you have to download the Adobe Creative Suite makes it very difficult to give it to other people. Back in the day when it was on a disc or a CD or whatever, it was a little bit easier. All through college, I never paid for Adobe, and even into my professional career, I still had these bootlegged copies or whatever that somebody gave me back in college, right? But as soon as they switched to the download version, they were able to protect their copyrights and their assets a lot easier. So it's just like the MP3s and stuff, it used to be pretty easy to let your friends burn your CDs. And now with the music download, honestly, if I wanted to put a song from my phone onto my wife's phone, I don't even know how I would do that at this point.
Right.
So, the fact that other industries and other platforms are able to protect their assets makes it a little bit easier. So if you explain to your client, like, hey, client, don't you use Microsoft Word? Well, yeah, okay, I do. Okay, can you give me a copy of that? Then they'll start to understand that. But because they have a digital file and they can email that file and they can upload that file to social media and they can put it on a thumb drive and hand it off to whoever else they want, or they can put it on Dropbox. They have so many ways that they can redistribute your digital assets, your images. I think that makes it a little bit more difficult for them to understand that it's, a medium that should be controlled by the copyright holder.
Right. Okay. So before we get into the money-making portion of licensing images, let's stick with the photography side of it. Is there anything different from a photography standpoint between an image that you would shoot for an architect or an interior designer versus one that you would shoot specifically to sell to, like you said, a tile manufacturer, cabinet manufacturer, anything like that?
Yeah, good question. If you were asking that question for real estate, the answer is usually yes. Most real estate photographers and real estate photos are shot very wide angle. You want to be able to see, the whole room, which makes sense because you're trying to give people a sense of the layout of the house, how the rooms connect to one another. You want it to look big because, obviously everybody wants a bigger place. And so those images are shot a little bit different than, a design type photo. An architecture, an interior design photo are typically going to be shot a little bit tighter, a little more artfully composed. All the details in this space will be paid attention to a little bit more as far as, how the furniture is placed in position, like the staging of pillows or items on countertops and things like that. And so once you get to the, interior design architecture type photos, those are going to be very similar and many times the same as a product company. Now, if a product company hired me to shoot specifically for them, I would shoot that a little bit different because, 100% of the time, the focus point would be on that particular product. And, the space around that product might be a little less cluttered, for example. But let's try to make an example here. Say we're shooting a photo of a kitchen for an interior designer, and we're up against a back wall, and in front of us there's an island with a sink and a faucet, and then behind that there's the back wall with a range and a tile backsplash. So that designer might want me to focus on the faucet in the middle of the room, which means the tile and the backsplash might be a little bit out of focus. And as I'm saying this, I'm just going to use an example from a very recent shoot that I did here in Hawaii, where as we were kind of setting up the shot, I was asking the client, how in focus do you want the background? Do you want it to be a little bit more blurry and the focus to be more on this island and faucet, or do you want the background to be a little sharper? That's going to, change my f-stop, right? Mm-hmm. So he said he wanted it to be a little bit more out of focus in the background. So I did that. I shot at f4. The island and the faucet were in focus. The background was, kind of blurry and out of focus. Very quickly, I switched settings and shot the exact same photo at f13 without even changing the focus point to where that tile backsplash was a little bit more in focus. And I was able to license that photo after the fact to the tile company. So, the style of shooting is very similar. But of course, if you're shooting for a product company, you want that product to be in focus. You want it to be the star of the show. When you're shooting for a designer, you might accidentally get the tile in focus, or accidentally get the tile as part of the shot that your client wants, and then you can still license those photos to the companies after the fact.
See, this is why I love talking to other photography professionals because this is, again, a whole new world that I wouldn't even think of. As a wedding photographer, I feel like I can't even imagine licensing an image of mine to somebody else because I feel like I'm capturing these photos for my couples. and while I take the photos, it feels like these are their photos. And I, again, can't even imagine what anybody else would do with these. But I guess this is kind of eye-opening, is that you as the photographer, this is your image. You could do whatever you want with it. And even if you're being paid to photograph an interior for an interior designer, you can still use that exact same photo to make more money after the fact by licensing these images, which goes back to kind of what you were saying before we started recording, the value of the photos that we take. And we're just leaving a lot of this value here on the table. But sorry, go on. You were about to say something there.
Seeing the light bulb go off in your head gets me super excited, because what I teach is not just how to license your photos. What I teach is what I call a licensing mindset. And so I want to help photographers like you and everybody else be able to look at their work through a different light, under a different lens, so to speak, and look at your work in such a way that makes you think all the time, who else can I sell this photo to? How else can I monetize this image? And once you start thinking like that, and once you start understanding the nuances of your industry or kind of adjacent industries that might be able to use some of your images in their marketing, then the floodgates open up. Then the doors really open, and you can kind of hit the ground running and start making some money. And so just to kind of give you a little example, in 2020, here we are, January 5th, 2021. Last year, even with the pandemic, I was able to increase my revenue by $35,000 from licensing photos that I had already been paid to shoot. And I expect it to be even more this year. So yes, you can be leaving quite a bit of money on the table. And as a wedding photographer, I would love to see a wedding photographer go through the course that I have and develop that licensing mindset, because obviously, like, my frame of reference is the BMX stuff I've licensed, the fitness stuff I've licensed, and now the interiors and architecture stuff. But I would love to see somebody from a different industry go through this to see what they can think of it, because again, I don't understand the nuances. I've had this same conversation with a few other people, just very briefly, and one of the first things that came up was like, oh, well, what about the flower person or the dressmaker or the venue or whatever? And the feedback that I immediately got, without digging too deep into the conversation, was, oh, well, all those people expect to get the images for free, or I have to give them away to the venue because I want to be on their preferred vendors list or whatever. And it's like a relationship-based industry and those kind of things. And in my industry, there is a lot of that misconception of, oh, the designer thinks that they can send the photos to the appliance company to post them on their Instagram because the designer wants the exposure. And when that happens, it's very frustrating for us as photographers, because that appliance company is building their brand off of my images without paying me. And so then it's, okay, how do I get them to take it down? How do I get paid? How do I turn that, appliance company into a paying client or whatever? And so I think there's probably some education that could take place in your industry, and some kind of opening the eyes a little bit and kind of widening your frame of reference, and thinking, who else can use these images? But kind of a little sidestep too is, I'm sure that there are some wedding photographers that shoot other things, right? And so here's another opportunity. A good example, when I was shooting BMX stuff, just for fun one night, I went out around the town that I lived in at the time, Long Beach, California, and shot a series of photos at night with, long exposure, like the lights lit up all cool around the city, different skylines and stuff. And I posted those on a blog post, and through SEO and just search engine juice or whatever, the blog post got some traction. And eventually a company reached out to me and said, hey, we are going to be part of a trade show coming up in Long Beach. We make motorhomes and like custom coaches and tour buses. We want to wrap our bus with a cityscape of Long Beach. Can we license one of your photos from downtown? And I was able to negotiate $1,000 for that image. And here I am, a BMX photographer, and I just sold a photo of my city for $1,000, because I understood that licensing and stuff.
And that's a big score. Now your image is on the side of a bus. I mean, how cool is that? I feel like just taking a picture of me in front of a bus with my image on it would be worth $1,000 for sure. That is so cool.
And to round out that story, I was actually riding BMX one day and just so happened to pass by while this trade show was going on and saw the bus with my photo on it.
Please tell me that you took a photo of yourself in front of it, though.
I think I was by myself. I have a photo of the bus. I think I actually sent you that photo.
Oh, that's awesome.
But I do have a photo of the bus. It's just an iPhone photo from a very old iPhone, but I have it nonetheless.
That is so cool. Going back to your idea there about wedding photographers, I think a lot of the pushback is that when it comes to weddings, a lot of the other businesses are person to person, right? So a lot of florists are just a single person. A lot of cake bakers are a small local business. A lot of venues, as you said, it's nice to get on those lists, which I understand. I fully understand that, like supporting your community to better yourself. But there's also a million other businesses that I can think of that maybe are not small or local that would love to pay for some of these images, like probably ring companies, jewelry. Um, a lot of the dresses probably, uh, when you show up in the morning, the bridesmaids are all wearing like some sort of like special robe or something that they got custom made. I'm sure that whoever made those would be interested in licensing those as well. So I can think of a lot of these ideas. And again, to your point, whereas this last year it was tough for wedding photographers. A lot of us could not legally photograph weddings, and a lot of people had to. It'd be nice to have that backup idea for additional income, maybe going out and doing some real estate photos to make some extra money and then continue to use this information as far as licensing images, just in case, I don't know, another global pandemic happens or something else terrible happens where we're forced to stay home. Let me go ahead and ask now, because I'm thinking about, there's been times where I've shown up to weddings and I thought to myself, this is not the wedding that I expected, right? Are there times where maybe you go into a home and you think, oh, this is so-so. I'm not sure if, I'll be able to actually get anything out of this. Is there anything that you do to spruce it up, or do you just have to wait until the next home that you photograph and hope that one's a winner?
Good question. Certainly when I was shooting real estate, there was many times that I was like, oh, I got into this thinking I was going to be hanging out in these $1 million mansions, and this is a piece of crap. Now that I'm working with the higher end clients, there's a lot less of that. There's certainly homes that are like more my style or less my style. But there are times, like, for example, when a builder will hire me and the house is empty, it's unfurnished. They have, an interior designer hasn't gone in there and put their personal touch. And it's like, all right, here's an empty shell of a house. Like, this isn't very exciting. But to those kind of things, on every shoot, I bring what I call a props kit. So I have a big Tupperware bin with like little staging items in it. So I bring a little Turkish towel and some soap bottles and a cutting board and some fake fruit and some bottles of sparkling water, a handful of items that I can put into kitchens, bathrooms, or maybe exterior like patio type areas that will make it look like the space is lived in. So, if a builder wants a completely empty kitchen shot, I can shoot that for him. But if, I've got a little extra time on my hands, I might put a couple things on the counter, shoot that same photo with some staging items in there. And now maybe the cabinet company will want to buy it because it doesn't look so empty and boring,
Right. Oh, that's a great tip. That's something that, it just makes sense, but I don't know if a lot of people would think about that. But obviously it comes from experience, and that's why we're listening to this podcast right now, so that we can continue to gain that experience. So let's go ahead and switch up a little bit. Let's kind of dive deeper into the business aspect of the licensing of our images. So let's say you go into a house, maybe it was empty, you stage a few photos, and then guess what? You got yourself a winning shot here. Who are we selling our photos to, and how do we find them?
You are listening to the free version of the Beginner Photography Podcast, where each week you learn how world-class photographers see and capture the world around them. If you want to hear the extended interview with their best business tips to learn how to make money with your camera, then become a premium member today by heading over to beginnerphotographypodcast.com and click the premium membership button to join now.
I love it. That was a very open and a very honest approach to how you go about doing this, and obviously some of the mistakes that you made, some of the ways that you're going to be trying to do this better in this year and make it even more profitable for you, and obviously protect yourself as well. Again, that's a huge thing that I know people are they're so worried about that will stop them from even getting started in the first place. And then you just come in here with that little piece of information and just solve it all. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah, that point of the analysis paralysis, or whatever you want to call it. If something is such a big hurdle that you're not going to even start, then skip that hurdle, go around it. And knock on wood here, I've never been sued. I've never had somebody screw me over. And, I'm sure there's times when I could have made more money by doing X, Y, and Z. I'm sure there's times when, a contract would have helped me because of A, B, and C. But at the end of the day, here I am sitting in Hawaii, living my dream, and I'm making money as a photographer. So,
You got to be doing something right. I love it. I mean, that's a perfect way to think about it, really. Again, so many people just get so hung up on the idea of just getting started that they don't. And I'm not immune to that either. Like that's totally me. That's totally me. So if I was in this position right now, thinking about the idea of licensing photos, one of the objections that would come up in my head would probably be something like third-party stock sites, right? Where you can just upload your photos to these sites. And I would love to hear your opinions, because to me it sounds like a whole lot less work than having to track down manufacturers and find the decision makers and come up with this and possibly negotiate a price. So talk me through that. Like, am I totally wrong here? Because the approach that you're taking is the exact opposite.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked this. It's a really good topic to bring up. I started submitting photos to stock websites back when I worked in the BMX industry because I was looking for other ways to increase my income. And I did the research and I saw that there wasn't any good BMX photos on websites. All the photos at the time were shot by non-BMX riders that didn't understand the nuances of the tricks. So my hope was like, hey, let's get some better photos out there in the world and let's make me some more money. The process of doing that was very time consuming and tedious. You said it seemed like it was easier.
It seems like it.
But there was a lot of like metadata, keywording, like description writing, the way, like the specific way that the stock websites had you upload things was very time consuming and very, system based. I had to get model releases from every rider, which I had never had to do before, which, for me was like a weird thing. Like, hey, I know I'm friends. I shot this photo of you a year ago. Can you sign this so I can try to sell it later? Like, it was awkward for me.
Yeah.
Later, I started submitting travel photos and stuff. And so I had several hundred, like probably close to 400 to 500 photos with stock agency. And from that agency, they had partnerships with others. So they were on multiple different platforms. And in about 10 years, I probably made about $2,000. Recently I went through and was looking at my stock photo sales, and there was photos that were sold for 12 cents, 36 cents, like less than $1 each per photo. And at that point, I decided I just want to pull out. Like I emailed the company and said, hey, just take me off the platform. Like I would rather not sell my photos than to sell them for 12 cents each. Like, to me, that's a slap in the face.
Sure.
And so the big difference is how you upload, the price you get, and then how people get the images. So the stock website is a wait and see type of thing, where you throw them up there and maybe people come to you, maybe not, which is cool. And it definitely can be a viable source of some income. And I'm sure there's people that do really well with stock photography and kind of have figured out how to work the system to their advantage, just like I have with my system. But my system is a very proactive way of doing it. And so it kind of puts the control a lot more in my hands. Once you understand who to look for, how to find them, once you get familiar with your copy and paste templates, again, that I provide in the course and that I use on a daily basis to try to sell my photos, there's definitely some work involved in like figuring it out in the beginning. Obviously, the course helps you, fast track that. But even for me, it's still, I'm putting in work. I'm not going to lie. Like I sit down at a computer for an hour or so and put in a little bit of time and effort. But it's a proactive approach instead of a wait and see approach. And again, I made $35,000 this year as opposed to $2,000 total over the last 10 years or so.
Right. Yeah. And I think that makes sense because, the amount of work that you got to put in for all those photos on those third-party stock sites, I guess I wasn't aware of how much work it takes. And I would much rather try to spend even a few hours trying to get, sell one photo or two photos for a few $100 rather than, take 10 minutes to sell it for 12 cents.
Right. And then let's extrapolate this a little bit more. The people that come to the stock photo website, well, first of all, if they're looking for a photo, they've got to sift through hundreds or thousands of photos that look similar to yours. And you got to hope they pick yours. Once they pick yours, what are the odds that they're going to see your name and come back to you to hire you as a photographer?
Oh, right.
Exactly zero. If you land in their inbox with a great photo and say, hey, I'm in, the Oahu, Hawaii region, please keep me in mind if you ever have projects out here that you need shot. What are the odds that they're going to hire you again for a shoot?
Much higher.
And I've been hired by other companies. I know, people that have gone through the course, other colleagues and friends of mine that have been, have built very long-term relationships, very lucrative relationships with companies that they originally got in touch with because they reached out with a photo.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool. So let's go ahead. I know that we're getting towards the end of our time here. So let's go ahead and kind of wind this down, and let's kind of keep it photography related and talk a little bit about gear, because that's something that we don't talk about very often on the podcast. But when it comes to an entirely new world of photography that I'm not perfectly versed in, I know that there's always little nuances and whatnot. So say an interior designer reaches out to you, and would a common goal be to come in and photograph an entire house, or would it just be a single space within that house? How does that work?
Yeah, another good question. It totally depends on that particular client and what their needs are. Very seldom do I shoot an entire house. Even if it's like an architect or a custom home builder, usually if they did build the entire house, there's usually like a couple of bedrooms or something that are just like, it's whatever, like it's not designed that good. And with the kind of work that I do, 10 to 15 photos in a day, maybe 20 photos on the really high end, like very rare side. But, we're not shooting that many photos because it's so, time consuming and methodical and expensive for them,
Sure.
And so shooting a whole house is pretty rare. A lot of times a custom home builder will do a kitchen and bathroom model. So it'll be like a small powder room that you get one, maybe two shots in a kitchen. And again, totally depends on what the client wants, what their budget is. My recent shoot here in Oahu that I just mentioned with that tile example, we only shot 3 photos in the kitchen. That was it. I showed up and shot 3 photos, and that was our day. So yeah, it totally depends on what the client's needs are.
Okay, so let's say, again, interior designer says, hey, guess what? We're photographing a kitchen and a bathroom that we remodeled. What are you packing in your bag? What do you need to take with you to enable you to capture it all?
I shoot with a Canon 5D Mark IV body. Tilt shift lenses are pretty common. They're almost a staple in this type of work. So I have a 24 millimeter tilt shift lens with a 1.4 extender. A lot of architecture interior photographers will only shoot with a tilt shift lens. They'll have a 17, a 24, and I think it's a 48 is the next one.
Mm-hmm.
And then they'll have the 1.4 and or the 2-time extender that they can kind of swap those out. I also use a 16 to 35 millimeter lens, or is it 17 to 35? 24 to 70, and I have a 70 to 200. So those kind of lenses. But the tilt shift lens for the beginners out there are going to allow you to shift your entire camera lens up so that you can get more ceiling or more flooring, for example, without having your vertical line start to go in or converge like a fun house, which is very important in architecture and interior work. You always want your walls to look straight, not crooked, not slanted. You want your horizontal lines on the ceiling and floor to be perfectly horizontal. So the tilt shift lens will be able to allow you to do that much easier without having to fix it in post-production.
Right. Yeah, I was going to say that Lightroom has the ability to automatically fix the geometry, but a tilt shift lens is what does it physically in camera so that you don't have to worry about things like that, right?
Yeah, and I'll be honest with you, I did it for a long time without a tilt shift lens. And it got to the point where, I wanted to increase the quality of my work because the edges of the frame on a tilt shift are going to stay sharp, whereas if you're starting to expand out and drag the verticals,
get stretched.
They get stretched and get a little less crisp and stuff. But another big reason was on site with my clients, as we were setting up the shots, it got to the point where I was working with high enough end clients that it was kind of embarrassing. And I felt like an amateur to show them the image and say, okay, well, these are crooked, but you have to use your imagination because in post I'll fix that, And so I wanted to be able to show my client on site, like, okay, this is the actual image we're creating here. But there's some people that don't use them and just fix it in Photoshop. And like I said, I did that for a long time, but it certainly helps. And I would like to get a couple more in my gear bag.
So getting started, beginners don't need a tilt shift, but that's more of a high-end thing that once they've been doing it for a while.
My opinion, that is correct. Other people will give you a different opinion, but that's my opinion. Yeah.
Okay. What about lighting?
Go on. Just to finish that, I did it for a long time and made a lot of money without it. So you can do it. So that's my opinion. Lighting, I bring in different flashes. I use Flashpoint, which I believe is like the same as Godox or whatever.
Yeah.
I have two Flashpoint Explore 600s, which are big, heavy flashes that put out a lot of power, and then two Flashpoint Speedlights, and then the radio trigger to fire all those. At times, I do wish I would have an extra one of each. It could be beneficial, but it's a lot to haul around. So two of the big ones, two of the small ones usually gets the job done. And then if it doesn't do everything I want, I composite the photos anyway, so I can light up one area of the room or space, and then move around. The flashes light up another area, and then we're compositing those in Photoshop anyway.
I guess that brings up another question. I guess when it comes to compositing, this will be my last question for you. Sorry, I know I'm keeping you here for a while. When it comes to compositing images, how often are you doing that? Do you do that for every image, or just windows with a lot of dynamic range, like with windows and stuff like that?
Personally, I do it with 99.9% of my photos.
Oh, wow.
In this industry, if you want to call it that, a lot of people use the word flambient. So flash plus ambient gives you a flambient blend. Some people are against the F word, but we'll call it flambient. So that's personally and currently my style of shooting. Everybody has their own style. I don't have a lot of like the dark and moody and kind of hard shadows and stuff. I'm not the light and airy where it's like all natural and super bright. I'm kind of in the middle. I would call my style a little bit crispy. I definitely go for the natural look, but at the same time, I want everything to be lit relatively evenly. So yeah, I'm compositing just about everything. So every photo that I create, I will shoot a series of bracketed images with ambient light. And this is with the house lights off, because a lot of times the house lights are kind of orange or give off some kind of glow and don't necessarily add to the photo at all. So house lights off, shoot a bracketed set of exposures, and then shoot a photo or multiple photos with flashes, and then we're blending those in Photoshop.
Well, I'm not sure how to end it any better than that. I feel like today you have pretty much laid out a very comprehensive plan, or I guess lesson, on not only what is licensing, but a lot about real estate photography, what it takes to photograph interiors, and even how to make money. So I just have to say thank you so much, obviously, for coming on. Why don't you let the listeners know where they can find out more about you, and obviously your course, to learn to really go in depth about this situation as well.
Sure. You can find me on Instagram at Adam Taylor Photos, and my website is Adam Taylor Photos if you want to check out my work. My email address is on there if you'd like to reach out. I'm pretty accessible. The course that I have is called Learn to License Your Photos. You mentioned earlier, it's more than 5 hours of very in-depth scripted content, meaning there's no fluff, there's no ums and buts and pauses. It's straight to the point. We have also probably 4 to 5 hours plus more coming of bonus content, which is in addition to all the course material, it's interviews with clients of mine on the manufacturer side. So the head of marketing of a tile company, interviews with a client of mine that we talked to them about licensing, just to get from the opposite end of the coin here perspective. Interviews with other photographers that have had different experiences. We have a private Facebook group that goes along with the course. It's a really cool community that we can all talk about this stuff and kind of share our tips and wins and tricks and stuff. So the course is at licenseyourphotos.com. Your listeners can get 25% off by using the promo code beginner at checkout. So just type in beginner and you'll get 25% off the course. And the ROI on it is pretty easy to track. Basically within 1 or 2 sales, most people make their money back on the course. And we've had people make several thousands of dollars by going through the course and learning this stuff. So it really is a no-brainer. I think people outside of the real estate, interior, and architecture space will still get a lot out of it. The nuancy stuff is obviously, again, based around my experience and what I currently do. But the big picture stuff, the licensing mindset stuff, the way it's going to get you thinking about things is all going to translate to just about any kind of photography. And I already saw your eyes open up a little bit during this conversation. I could see the wheels turning in your head. You already started to mention some ideas that just came to the top of your head while we were having this conversation. So, the idea is that you hear those couple of ideas, or you think those couple of ideas in the beginning, but by the time you get through the course, that licensing mindset has really begun to develop. And once you get out there in the real world, it's just going to keep churning. I explain it like when you get a new car or you're about to look for a new car and you start seeing that car everywhere on the side of or on the
Yeah.
road now. Like now that you've had this conversation with me, I'm hoping that the plan, the idea is that you're going to start seeing those opportunities more. And before your eyes were just kind of closed to it, and now you just have a little bit bigger, area to look at. And hopefully your licensing mindset will kick in, and you'll start to see these ideas all around you.
There was truly so much I loved about this interview with Adam. I, as a wedding photographer, am just never in that mindset of looking for things to license, and being able to hear him talk about how, just simple changes can really, boost potential revenue by just looking around and finding things that I'm already around that companies are going to want to get images of anyway. So why not be the person who provides those images for them? And I am going to go back and look through some of my my archive of wedding images and just see, is there anything that stands out? And if so, how can I do more of that at weddings going forward? So super excited. However, my biggest takeaway from this interview with Adam was just how great it was to hear that he started off in an industry that was nowhere near related to where he's at today, shooting, real estate and architecture and product photography like this, essentially. He started off doing extreme sports, and so many photographers I hear get hung up in the beginning, like, I don't know what to focus on. Do I want to do this? Do I want to do that? The answer is it kind of doesn't matter. Follow whatever you're feeling right now. Like, where do you want to dive in? Because right now it may be newborns, or today it may be weddings. You may want to get into weddings, but as time goes on, realize I don't want to be that, that 60-year-old wedding photographer photographing 20-year-olds. Like, maybe I should transition into a different area of photography. And Adam did that. Like, he did that. So it's just proof that it is entirely possible. And if it's something that you want, I say go after it. Don't let the idea of, oh, what am I going to do, stop you from moving forward. Move forward. And then when you get there and realize, maybe your situation's changed, then you can change it up. That's what Adam did, and it worked for him. Now, if you are interested in learning more about Adam's course, Learn to License Your Photos, he actually gave me to give to you. So he gave you a coupon that's going to save you 25% off of your purchase by using the promo code BEGINNER. And I have the link in the show notes as well. So if you want to check out the course, head over to the show notes for this episode. Check out Adam Taylor's Learn to License Your Photos course, which you may be able to Google as well. And then you can use the promo code BEGINNER at checkout and save 25%. So again, thank you, Adam, for sending that over and offering that up for all the listeners. I would love to know what your biggest takeaway from this episode is. Are you going to change up the way that you shoot? Are you going to start exploring licensing your photos? Do you have any more questions about licensing your photos? If so, come on into the Beginner Photography Podcast Facebook group and feel free to ask your questions there. We are always happy to help. So with that, we're going to close out this week's episode. Until next week, get out there and just keep shooting. All right. Stay safe. Love you all.
Thank you for listening to the Beginner Photography Podcast. If you enjoy the show, consider leaving a review in iTunes. Keep shooting, and we'll see you next week.
Can I ask why you decided to pack up and move?
Yeah, just to live the dream, man.
Really?
We had this vision.
That's awesome.
Yeah, we had this vision board of like what we wanted our life to look like, and a little bit of the backstory to this. I won't go too deep into it right now, but we were actually going to move to Bali, Indonesia, for a year. We were going to, like, quote unquote, take a year off and try to figure out like different online revenue streams and stuff, because you can't legally work in Bali. I wouldn't be able to like make money shooting photos there.
Oh, interesting.
But
so it all have to be online based.
Yeah, exactly. But we had leased a house over there, like on the beach, like with a pool, like, super cheap place, because everything's cheap over there. We're going to like live off of savings. And we had our one-way flight booked for March 29th. And then obviously, it happened, COVID hit, forced us to stay home. So basically, like, we just had this big grandiose dream of like living this island paradise, and COVID shut that down. So all year we were just like, how can we keep this dream alive? How can we still make our dream a reality? And in the US, like without having to move to a new country, basically Hawaii is the only place that had everything that we wanted in our lifestyle. So November 30th, we said, you know what? Let's just pack up and move. And I'm sorry, that was September 30th, and November 13th, we were here. So less than a
Oh
month and a
man.
half after we made the decision, I had told my clients goodbye. I was in a retainer situation with like good steady income. I was like, you know what? The money doesn't matter. Like, you know, our life and happiness matters. So let's go live our
Wow.
dreams and stop, waiting till it's perfect, waiting till we retire, waiting for whatever to happen to
Right.
create our dream life. And here we are.
That is so cool. There are so many people who could not do that, whether
Yeah.
it's the fear inside of them or,
Yeah.
you know, that fear of I have a steady job, like why
Hmm.
would I give all that up? And that's
Yeah.
cool. That is so cool to hear. I love
Thanks,
that.
man. And
I love
a
that.
big part of that too is we want to inspire people, and not necessarily to move to an island, but hopefully through our story and what we decided to do with our family, having a young kid and everything, hopefully that inspires other people to push themselves out of their comfort zone a little bit and grow and kind of push themselves as a person a little bit more.